Jackson Searle stood at the edge of the mining pit, boots precariously close to the lip. A vast expanse of nothingness yawned below. Captain Jackson Allurin leaned back in his chair, feet kicked up on the console. A smug grin stretched across his face like a cat that got the cream and the canary. "You really think this heap's gonna hold together long enough for us to find anything worth scrapping?" asked Marla, the ship's engineer, who had more grease under her nails than the rust bucket had credits to its name. "Why not?" Jackson said. "If it doesn't, at least we'll finally have a reason to stop calling this thing a ship." They were a ragtag crew, the kind you'd find on the wrong end of a good idea. Besides Jackson and Marla, there was Dirk, their navigator who had all the charm of a cactus in a sandstorm, and Illy, the trigger-happy rookie who thought shooting first and thinking never was a solid strategy. "So, what exactly are we looking for again?" Dirk asked, eyes glued to the ancient radar screen like it might spit out gold bars if he squinted hard enough. "Treasure," Jackson replied. "Or, failing that, anything that might convince someone else it's treasure." The truth was, they were after remnants of the fallen solar empire, hulks of ships that once bristled with power and prestige, now just drifting through space like forgotten dreams. Jackson figured if they could find something valuable, or even something that looked valuable, they could sell it and maybe not have to eat protein paste for dinner every night. "If we get caught in that black hole's gravity well, you think our bones'll end up worth something," Marla mused, tapping her wrench against the console. "Probably more than your jokes," Illy chimed in, earning himself a wrench aimed at his head, which he dodged with all the grace of a man who'd had a lot of practice ducking Marla's temper. The ships around them were a bizarre gallery of once mighty vessels, now as useful as a chocolate spacesuit. Some were barely recognizable, twisted and torn metal hulks. Others were more intact, but no less dead. The graveyard was a somber reminder of what was, and a stark illustration of what greed and ambition could cost. "Look at this," Dirk said, pointing at a cluster of blips on the radar. "Looks like a decent-sized wreck up ahead." "Let's hope it's not another decoy," Jackson said. "I've had my fill of ghost ships for one lifetime." As they neared the wreck, the tension in the rust bucket increased. It was the kind of silence that screamed louder than any explosion. Everyone knew that space was a fickle mistress, ready to plunge a knife into your back the second you thought you were safe. "All right, folks," Jackson said, standing up and cracking his knuckles. "Let's suit up and check out this big bastard." They donned their suits, which smelled vaguely of sweat and desperation, and headed to the airlock. One by one they drifted out, tethered to the rust bucket like stubborn children to an unwilling parent. The ship they approached was a Leviathan, its hull scarred and battered, yet still majestic in a fallen from grace kind of way. "Looks like someone's been chewing on it," Illy commented, his voice crackling over the comms. "Just hope they don't come back for seconds," Marla replied dryly. They floated toward an open hatch, their movements slow and deliberate. Inside, the ship's corridors echoed with the ghosts of 1,000 footsteps. The air was stale, the kind of musty scent that clings to places long forgotten. "Let's split up," Jackson said. "Marla, you and Dirk check the aft section. Illy, you're with me. Keep an eye out for anything that might be worth a damn." Marla gave a mock salute and drifted down the corridor with Dirk in tow. Jackson and Illy ventured deeper into the belly of the beast, flashlights slicing through the darkness like knives. "So what do you think really happened to these guys?" Illy asked, voice hushed despite the comms. "Same thing that always happens," Jackson replied. "Someone got greedy, someone else got dead." They passed room after room, each more desolate than the last. Broken equipment, shattered glass, and the occasional floating debris painted a picture of hurried abandonment. "Check this out," Illy said, pointing to a console that flickered weakly to life as they approached. Jackson tapped a few buttons, and the screen finally settled on something legible, a schematic of the ship, along with a series of logs. He browsed through the entries, eyes narrowing as he read. "Seems like they were running from something," Jackson muttered. "Something they couldn't see or maybe didn't want to." That was when the screen fizzled out, leaving them in the dark once more. "Well, that's not ominous," Illy said, laughing nervously. "Nope, not at all," Jackson replied, voice dry as dust. Meanwhile, Marla and Dirk were making their own discoveries. "Look at this," Marla said, gesturing to a room that looked like it had seen one hell of a party, perhaps the kind where the guests had brought guns instead of wine. Debris littered the floor and scorch marks lined the walls. "Looks like they left in a hurry," Dirk observed, sifting through the remains with the toe of his boot. "Or they were sent packing," Marla replied, eyeing the destruction warily. A soft beep echoed through her comms, drawing her attention to a handheld device she carried, one that measured radiation and electrical activity. Dirk, you seeing this?" Marla said, holding up the device. Dirk squinted at the screen and frowned. "That's a hell of a lot of power for a dead ship." Back with Jackson and Illy, they stumbled upon what seemed to be the ship's command center. Jackson's eyes immediately caught the glint of a data core, still humming with faint energy. "Bingo," Jackson grinned, reaching for the core. "This might just be our ticket to a decent meal." As he disconnected the core, a voice crackled to life through the ship's comm system, a voice that was neither human nor friendly. "Unauthorized access detected," it said, each word dripping with malice. "Well, that's not unsettling at all," Illy said, his hand hovering near his sidearm. "Get back to the rust bucket now," Jackson ordered, the calm in his voice contrasting with the urgency in his movements. As they made their way back, the ship around them began to hum with renewed energy, lights flickering ominously like a predator waking from slumber. They regrouped with Marla and Dirk, who wore expressions that spoke volumes. "I take it you heard the voice of doom, too," Marla said, not bothering to hide her sarcasm. "Yeah," Jackson replied, "and I have a feeling it's not a fan of yours." The rust bucket was a welcome sight, its familiar ugliness a beacon of relative safety in the chaos. They clambered back aboard, and Jackson immediately locked the hatch. "All right, let's get the hell out of here," he said, sliding into the pilot's seat. As they powered up the engines, the derelict ship behind them began to tremble, like it was trying to shake off the dust of ages. "I've got a bad feeling about this," Dirk muttered, eyes glued to the rear camera feed. The rust bucket lurched forward, engines straining like an old man trying to get out of a comfortable chair. They sped away from the wreck, but the danger felt closer than ever. "What's that thing you always say, Cap?" Illy asked, looking at Jackson. "If you can't see the trouble, it's probably because it's already behind you," Jackson replied, jaw set with determination. The black hole loomed in the distance, a cosmic maw ready to swallow them whole. But it was the least of their worries now. "What do we do with the data core?" Marla asked, eyeing the device like it might explode. "We figure out what scared an entire empire enough to leave a ship like that," Jackson said, his voice carrying the weight of a man who'd seen one too many bad days. As they sailed through the starship graveyard, a sense of doom hung over them like a storm cloud, threatening to break at any moment. "Just another day in paradise," Jackson muttered, a wry smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. The rust bucket journeyed on, carrying them away from one danger and undoubtedly toward another. But that was life on the edge of nowhere, where the only certainty was uncertainty. And as the darkness of space closed in around them, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were no longer alone. The rust bucket shuddered as the gravitic engines grumbled to life, propelling them away from the derelict hulk. Jackson kept his gaze forward, pretending not to notice the flickering lights on the console that suggested all sorts of mechanical ailments. "Well," Illy said, breaking the silence, "that was fun. Like a surprise party where you're the piñata." "Yeah, and the surprise is that you're full of crap," Marla added, unstrapping her helmet and shaking out her wild hair, which seemed to have a life of its own. Dirk remained glued to his radar screen, though what he saw could have been the galaxy's most boring lava lamp for all the interest it sparked in his eyes. "I hate to be the bearer of bad news," he said, each word dripping with the enthusiasm of a man announcing a tax audit, "but I think we've got company." "Company?" Jackson twisted in his seat, already regretting asking. Please tell me it's the kind that brings wine and cheese, not interstellar death. Afraid not, Dirk replied. Looks like an AI fleet is heading our way. Quick too, like they've got a coupon for a free rust bucket. Jackson sighed, a low growl of frustration rumbling in his chest. Probably after the data core. Could be they're not fans of ancient human tech getting into grubby hands like ours. Speaking of ancient tech, Marla piped up, tapping her fingers against her console with a rhythm that suggested impatience or the onset of a neurological disorder. I was doing a little light reading in the ship's library. Library? Illy asked, brows furrowing as if he'd just been told cats could fly. Yeah, you know, those dusty things filled with words. Marla rolled her eyes. Anyway, I found something called the stupidity amplifier. Sounds like something Illy's been using all along, Jackson quipped, earning a snort from Marla. Hey, Illy protested, but his scowl was undercut by the playful jab. Cut to the chase, Marla, Jackson said, ignoring Illy's wounded puppy look. Fine, she huffed. It's some kind of ancient artifact. Apparently, it was used by the old empire to turn the tide in battles, made enemy AI go haywire by amplifying their processing quirks, like getting them to solve pi to the last digit. That's impossible, Dirk said flatly, eyes still on his radar. Exactly, Marla smirked, folding her arms over her chest. That's the genius of it. Jackson leaned back, pondering the implications. An AI fleet could use it against us turn hour, quirks up to 11, like needing a bathroom break right in the middle of a firefight, Illy suggested. More like forgetting which end of the blaster is the business end, Dirk added dryly. Jackson rubbed his temples, feeling a headache brewing like a storm on the horizon. So, we're sitting on a piece of tech that could either save our skins or get us fried by a bunch of overly curious toasters. Yep, Marla nodded. And it looks like those toasters want their hands on it real bad. Illy's fingers drummed nervously on the armrest. Any chance we can use it before they get here? Probably not without it blowing up in our faces, Marla replied. Using ancient tech without a manual might as well be juggling hand grenades. Jackson stood up, pushing his chair back with a scrape that echoed through the cramped cabin. All right, listen up. We can't let them take this thing. We need a plan, something stupid enough to work. Stupid we can do, Illy said with a lopsided grin. Yeah, we're experts, Dirk added, finally tearing his eyes away from the radar to join the conversation. Okay then, Jackson said, eyes alight with a reckless energy. We lure them into the starship graveyard, use the wrecks to create a little obstacle course. Marla, think you can rig up something from the junk around here. Make it look like the stupidity amplifier is active. Marla's eyes glinted with mischief. Oh, I've got a few tricks up my sleeve. Dirk leaned in, a rare spark of interest in his gaze. And I'll keep them chasing their tails on radar. Make them think they are on the right track when they're just circling the drain. Sounds like a plan worthy of our collective genius, Jackson said, clapping his hands together. Illy, you ready to keep them off our backs? Born ready, Cap, Illy replied, patting his blaster. I'll give him a show they won't forget. With their impromptu strategy hashed out, the crew set to work. Marla rummaged through the rust bucket's meager supply of spare parts, muttering to herself in the universal language of frustrated engineers everywhere. She cobbled together a jumbled mess of wires, circuits, and sheer desperation, hoping it would be enough to fool the incoming AI fleet. Meanwhile, Dirk tweaked the radar, creating phantom signals and electronic ghosts to lead the enemy on a merry chase. Let's see how well they like playing hide and seek, he muttered, a rare smile ghosting across his lips. Illy took his position at the ship's armament console, fingers dancing over the buttons with the finesse of a concert pianist who'd decided to dabble in explosives. Jackson oversaw it all, his mind racing with 1,000 possibilities, each more precarious than the last. He felt the weight of their situation pressing down on him, a familiar presence that never seemed to leave, like an old friend who'd overstayed their welcome. As the AI fleet drew closer, the rust bucket maneuvered into position, ducking behind the hulking carcasses of long-dead ships. The graveyard loomed around them, a silent audience to their desperate gambit. "Here they come," Dirk announced, his voice tight with anticipation. The first of the AI ships appeared on the radar, sleek and efficient like predators of the void. They moved with purpose, zeroing in on the decoy signal Marla had concocted. "Hope they're ready for a wild goose chase," Illy said, his finger hovering over the trigger. Jackson nodded, eyes fixed on the viewscreen. "Let's give them a run for their money." As the AI fleet closed in, the rust bucket darted between wrecks, using the twisted metal remains as cover. Illy let loose a barrage of shots, each one a calculated attempt to mislead and confuse. The AI responded in kind, their weapons lighting up the darkness with deadly precision. It was a ballet of destruction, a dance on the edge of oblivion where one wrong step could mean the end. "Keep moving," Jackson ordered, guiding the rust bucket with deft hands. The ship groaned in protest, but it followed his commands with the reluctant obedience of a mule forced up a mountain. Marla's decoy worked like a charm, the AI swarming the ghost signal with all the enthusiasm of a dog chasing its own tail. But it wouldn't last forever. Eventually they'd figure out the ruse and come back for the real prize. "We need to get them off our scent permanently," Jackson said, voice hard with determination. "Any bright ideas?" Illy asked, a bead of sweat trickling down his temple. "Just one," Jackson replied, a wicked grin spreading across his face. "Dirk, remember that old signal manipulation trick you used back on New Vegas, the one that nearly got us vaporized?" Dirk asked, even as his fingers moved to input the necessary commands. "That's the one," Jackson confirmed. "Let's see if we can feed them a little white noise." Dirk's hands flew over the console, and soon the airwaves were alive with interference, static, and garbled nonsense. The AI ships hesitated, their coordination faltering as they struggled to make sense of the electronic chaos. The crew watched in tense silence as their pursuers wavered, caught between their programming and the discordant signals. "Come on, you overclocked coffee makers," Marla muttered under her breath. "Take the bait." Finally, the AI fleet withdrew, their formation breaking apart as they retreated to regroup and reassess. The rust bucket trembled in the aftermath, its systems taxed almost to the breaking point but still intact. "We did it," Illy said, disbelief coloring his words. "For now," Jackson cautioned, though relief softened his tone. "But they'll be back, and next time they won't be so easily fooled." "So, what do we do with the stupidity amplifier?" Marla asked, eyeing the device with a mix of curiosity and mistrust. "We find a way to either use it or destroy it," Jackson replied. "Preferably before those metalheads make another attempt." Dirk leaned back, running a hand through his hair as he considered their options. "Maybe we can use it as leverage. Convince someone with deeper pockets and bigger guns to take it off our hands. Or we could just pawn it off to the highest bidder," Illy suggested. "Let someone else deal with the AI aftermath." Jackson shook his head, the weight of command settling back onto his shoulders like an old, familiar cloak. "No, we need to be smart about this. If we mess up, it's not just us who'll pay the price." The crew fell into a contemplative silence, each lost in their thoughts as the rust bucket drifted through the graveyard of dreams. They were alive for now, but the specter of what lay ahead loomed large in their minds. "Just another day at the office," Marla said, her tone resigned but with a hint of defiance. "And to think I could have been a florist." "Yeah, but where's the fun in that?" Illy replied, the ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. Jackson gazed out into the vastness of space, his expression a mix of resolve and exhaustion. "Let's get to work, people. We've got a stupid plan to come up with." And with that they plunged back into the chaos, driven by the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, stupidity could be their salvation. The rust bucket limped through space like an old dog that had seen too many scraps. Its gravitic engines wheezed with every maneuver, and the hull groaned like a haunted house in a high wind. But it was still moving, through sheer stubbornness if nothing else. Jackson watched the viewscreen as the AI fleet disappeared behind clouds of static interference, the kind only Dirk could conjure up. It wasn't exactly a victory, more like a temporary stay of execution. But sometimes that's all you could hope for in this line of work. Well, we've outrun a fleet of killer toasters, Illy said, rubbing his neck. What's next? A dance-off with a black hole. Don't tempt fate, Marla replied, shoving a tangle of wires into a half-open panel. The way things are going, we'll be doing the Macarena in singularity territory by noon. Dirk glanced up from his radar, which was more duct tape than display at this point. Ships holding together by the grace of some forgotten deity. We need to set down for repairs before it decides to fall apart in the middle of a firefight. Jackson sighed, leaning back in his chair. All right, let's look for a place to touch down. Some uncharted rock where we can lick our wounds without interruption. Speaking of interruptions, Marla chimed in, I found something interesting in the data core you handed me earlier. Oh, let me guess, Illy said with mock enthusiasm. We've inherited an intergalactic timeshare. Not quite, Marla replied, ignoring his sarcasm. It's a series of flawed logic patterns. Think of it like a brain teaser, but for AI. It's an ancient method to confuse them, overloads their circuits trying to resolve the paradox. Dirk raised an eyebrow. So, you're saying we can give them an existential crisis? Pretty much, Marla smirked. It's like asking a robot whether it dreams of electric sheep and watching it implode trying to answer. Jackson considered the implications, his fingers drumming thoughtfully on the armrest. Could it help us keep them off our backs a little longer? Marla shrugged. If it works like the blueprints suggest, it'll be like tossing a philosophical hand grenade into their midst. Philosophical grenades, mechanical breakdowns. What's next? Illy asked, ticking off the list on his fingers. Are we going to find out the ship's actually a sentient being with daddy issues? Let's hope not, Jackson muttered. We'd have to pay for therapy. With the decision made, the crew set about preparing the logic patterns for deployment. Marla worked with the focus of a scientist setting up a particularly cruel experiment, while Dirk fidgeted with the radar to keep them ahead of any electronic eavesdroppers. Illy, meanwhile, had taken to the armament console again, tinkering with the targeting systems like a bored child with a toy. You know, if these patterns work, we should patent them. Guaranteed AI breakdown in 3 easy steps. Sure, Dirk snorted, and maybe we can sell him a bridge on Mars while we're at it. Jackson watched them work, a strange sense of camaraderie warming the cold, metallic confines of their ship. They weren't just a crew, they were a pack of misfits, bound together by shared insanity and the occasional stroke of genius. As the rust bucket plodded along, Dirk managed to spot a potential pit stop, a derelict space station orbiting a forgotten moon. It looked about as inviting as a grizzly bear's den, but it was secluded enough for their purposes. Set course, Jackson ordered. Let's hope there's still some juice left in the old girl to make it there. Asking a lot from a ship that sounds like it's got a smoker's cough, Illy commented, his eyes still on the console. Jackson gave him a mock glare. Hey, she may be a piece of junk, but she's our piece of junk. And so they angled towards the space station, the rust bucket's engine sputtering like a dying lawnmower. Every shudder of the ship felt like a countdown to disaster, but Jackson's steady hand kept them on course. The station loomed ahead, a relic from a bygone era when humanity had loftier dreams. Now it drifted aimlessly, an abandoned husk at the edge of oblivion. Docking procedures engaged, Dirk announced, his voice tinged with the strain of concentration. The rust bucket clamped onto the station with a resounding thud, the airlock grinding open to reveal nothing but shadows and stale air. We're in, Marla declared, checking her gear. Let's see if this place has any surprises left. Illy grabbed his blaster, giving it a quick once-over. If it does, I'm voting we leave a note and skedaddle. Noted, Jackson said, leading the way into the station's darkened corridors. But let's try not to wake the neighbors. The crew moved cautiously through the station, their footsteps echoing like the ghosts of long-dead engineers. The place was a tomb, but they weren't here for sightseeing. They needed parts, resources, anything to keep the rust bucket in the sky a little longer. Marla split off to scavenge for tech, while Dirk and Illy checked the station's systems for any signs of life, mechanical or otherwise. Jackson lingered behind, watching their six with the uneasy feeling of a man who'd walked into too many traps before. "Find anything useful," Jackson called out as Marla returned, her arms laden with scavenged components. "Couple of power cells, some wiring," she replied. "Nothing that'll win us a beauty contest, but they'll keep us running," Dirk rejoined them, shaking his head. "Place is dead, Cap. No power, no atmosphere, just dust and memories." "Great," Illy grumbled, peering into the shadows as if expecting them to pounce. "We came all this way for a guided tour of a ghost ship. Better than getting vaporized," Jackson pointed out. "Let's finish up and get out of here." As they made their way back to the rust bucket, Marla paused, glancing at her rusted console. "Think this thing can still transmit?" Jackson frowned. "What are you thinking?" "That we send out a little message," she said, her voice laced with mischief. "Broadcast those flawed logic patterns. Let the AI have a nice philosophical debate while we make our exit." Illy chuckled. "Confuse him while we get gone. I like it." "Make it quick," Jackson ordered. "We don't want to stick around to see the fireworks." With practiced efficiency, Marla wired the console to transmit. The patterns went out like a siren's song, luring any nearby AI into a web of confusion. "Let's hope it works," Dirk said as they hurried back to their ship. "Hope," Illy scoffed. "Hope's just optimism in a cheap tuxedo." Jackson led them back aboard the rust bucket, sealing the airlock with a sense of relief. They bought themselves some time, but the clock was still ticking. "Engines online," Dirk reported as they settled back into position. Jackson nodded, guiding the ship away from the station. The rust bucket shuddered and groaned like an arthritic octogenarian, but it moved. "Next stop anywhere but here," Jackson said, entering a random course into the nav computer. "Let's keep those AI guessing." As they left the station behind, a sense of tentative calm settled over the crew. The threat was still out there, lurking beyond their sensor range, but for now they'd carved out a brief respite. Marla leaned back, wiping her brow with the back of her hand. "If nothing else, this adventure's taught me one thing." "And what's that?" Illy asked, idly spinning his chair. "That the universe has a sick sense of humor," she replied, grinning despite herself. "Too right," Jackson agreed, his eyes scanning the star-studded void. "But what else have we got to laugh at?" The rust bucket pressed on, a stubborn blip in the vastness of space, held together by duct tape, determination, and the indomitable spirit of its ragtag crew. They weren't heroes, just survivors trying to outwit a fate that seemed hell-bent on catching up with them. And so, with flawed logic patterns as their shield and a healthy dose of irreverence as their sword, they continued their journey through the stars, unflinching in the face of adversity, and ready to embrace whatever idiotic plan Jackson dreamt up next. For in this universe, as in life, it was often the stupid, the reckless, and the downright ludicrous plans that somehow, against all odds, managed to succeed. The rust bucket, true to its name, was creaking along like a drunk stumbling home after a night out. The engines wheezed with every maneuver, coughing like an emphysemic chain smoker on a cold morning. In the confines of the cockpit, the crew was trying to figure out whether they'd just made things better or signed their own death warrants with those logical paradoxes. Illy slouched in his seat, fiddling with the armament console like it owed him money. "So, did our little philosophical hand grenade go off as planned, or did we just paint a bullseye on our backs?" Dirk, glued to the patchwork radar screen, muttered something that might have been a curse or a prayer. "I'm picking up something. Might be static, might be our toaster buddies having a crisis of faith." "Hard to tell with this heap of scrap." Jackson leaned over, peering at the screen as if squinting would make the picture any clearer. "With our luck, it'll be both. So what's the verdict, Dirk? Are we screwed or just mildly inconvenienced?" Dirk scratched his head, grimacing. "Bit of both, Cap. Looks like our paradoxes caught their attention all right. Problem is they're not backing off. If anything, they're zoning in. Must be curious about the source of their newfound existential dread." "Great," Illy drawled, tapping a rhythm on his console. "We've just become the most interesting thing in the galaxy to a bunch of killer robots. Just what I always wanted." Marla entered the cockpit, her arms still full of scavenged parts. She dumped the lot on the floor with a clatter that echoed through the ship. "Here's the hall." "Now someone tell me why I feel like we're about to be on the menu." "Because the universe hates us," Illy replied, not missing a beat. "That's the spirit," Jackson said. He thumbed the intercom, sending his voice echoing through the ship. "All right, crew, listen up. The AI are still on our tail. They are either curious, pissed, or both. Either way, we need to throw them off before they decide to turn us into space dust." "So what's the plan?" Marla asked, arms crossed. She looked like she was expecting him to pull a miracle out of somewhere decidedly unmiraculous. Jackson scratched his chin, an old habit from when he used to pretend to have a beard. Made him feel wise. "We need to find a hidey hole, somewhere we can lay low and patch up." "Dirk, any ideas?" Dirk squinted at the radar like he was trying to read the future in a bowl of alphabet soup. "There's an asteroid field not far off. Could be a good place to lose him if we don't mind a few dents." "Dents?" Illy scoffed. "More like a full-body massage with a sledgehammer. But hey, what have we got to lose?" "Our lives, for one," Marla pointed out, ever the realist. "Minor detail," Illy quipped. "Besides, living's overrated." Jackson nodded, making an executive decision. "All right, let's head for the rocks. Marla, get those power cells installed. We'll need every bit of juice we can spare. Illy, keep the weapons hot and ready. Dirk, guide us in." As the crew scrambled to their tasks, the rust bucket angled towards the asteroid field. The engines grumbled in protest, but Jackson coaxed them along with the practiced hand of a man who'd spent far too long sweet-talking a cantankerous machine. The asteroids loomed ahead, a chaotic jumble of rock and ice tumbling through space like nature's own pinball game. Jackson maneuvered the ship with all the finesse of a man threading a needle while blindfolded and drunk. "Eyes sharp, folks," Jackson called out, his voice steady despite the chaos. "This ain't gonna be pretty." The rust bucket plunged into the field, dodging and weaving between the massive stones. Each near miss sent a shudder through the ship, the hull screeching in protest. "Feels like we're riding a bull in a china shop," Illy muttered, knuckles white on his console. "But you're still smiling," Marla observed, strapping herself in. Illy flashed a grin that was more grimace than anything else. "Yeah, well, I'm a masochist at heart." Dirk, his eyes glued to the radar, was muttering coordinates that Jackson followed with a grim determination. It was a delicate dance of desperation, and the rust bucket was leading. They twisted and turned, the ship groaning with every maneuver. Jackson could almost hear the eyes' befuddlement as their prey vanished into the labyrinth. "How we looking, Dirk?" Jackson called over the commotion. "Looks like they're having trouble tracking us in here," Dirk reported, his voice a mix of relief and tension. "But we gotta keep moving. They'll figure it out sooner or later." "Later's better," Jackson replied, eyes fixed on the viewscreen. "Let's keep them guessing." Marla worked with quick, efficient movements, slotting the power cells into place. Sparks flew and she cursed under her breath. "These cells are older than Illy's jokes, but they should hold." "I resent that," Illy shot back, flipping a switch that made the ship's defenses hum to life. "My jokes are timeless." Jackson smirked, the banter a welcome distraction from the reality of their situation. "All right, folks, let's see if we can find a nice cozy spot to hole up." They pushed deeper into the field, looking for a nook or cranny big enough to hide in. The asteroids shifted around them, a shifting maze that threatened to crush them if they so much as blinked wrong. "Watch it!" Dirk yelled as a particularly large chunk of rock loomed ahead. Jackson yanked the controls, the rust bucket rolling sideways to avoid becoming a smear on the asteroid's surface. The ship's stabilizers screamed in protest, but they held just barely. "Close one," Illy remarked, deadpan. "Too close," Marla agreed, her eyes scanning the viewscreen for any sign of a safe haven. Then Dirk's voice broke through the tension. "There, that gap in the rocks. Looks like there's a cave or something." Jackson squinted at the radar, then nodded. "All right, hang on, everyone, we're diving in." With a flick of the controls, the rust bucket veered towards the gap, skimming past jagged rocks that looked eager to tear them apart. The ship slipped through the opening, entering a hollowed-out asteroid that seemed tailor-made for hiding. Jackson cut the engines, letting the ship drift to a gentle stop. The silence was deafening after the chaos of the asteroid field, the crew holding their breath as if their pursuers could hear them breathing. "Nice flying, Cap," Marla said, unclipping her harness. "Now let's hope they don't find us." "Hope's not a strategy," Illy reminded her, but there was a hint of admiration in his voice. "It's better than nothing," Jackson replied, his gaze fixed on the radar. "Let's keep things quiet. If we're lucky, they'll pass us by." The crew settled into an uneasy silence, the weight of their predicament hanging like a storm cloud. The rust bucket was a fragile sanctuary, and outside the universe was eager to shatter it. Marla busied herself with repairs, the clink and clatter of her tools a familiar melody. Dirk kept watch on the radar, his eyes flicking between the screen and the view screen with a hawk's vigilance. Illy, ever the optimist, leaned back in his chair, feet up on the console. "You know, if we ever make it out of this, we should write a book. How Not to Die in Space. Could be a bestseller." "Yeah, because everyone wants advice from the crew of the rust bucket," Marla quipped, not looking up from her work. "Hey, we're still here, aren't we?" Illy shot back. "That's gotta count for something." It was gallows humor, the kind that came naturally to those who lived on the edge of oblivion. The crew knew better than to count on anything but each other and their own wits. Time passed in fits and starts, measured by the steady ticking of Dirk's watch and the occasional groan of the ship settling into its temporary home. The tension remained, a constant undercurrent that refused to dissipate. Then, with a flicker of static, the radar screen began to light up. Dirk's brow furrowed as he leaned closer, squinting at the display. "A Cap," Dirk said, his voice low and urgent. Jackson turned, his eyes narrowing. "What is it?" "I'm picking up a signal," Dirk replied. "Faint, but it's there, could be them." A collective sigh swept through the crew, the reality of their situation crashing down like a tidal wave. They were sitting ducks, trapped in a pocket of safety that could easily become a tomb. "Okay," Jackson said, his voice calm but determined. "Let's not panic, we've got options." "Like what?" Illy asked, his bravado slipping for the first time. Jackson thought for a moment, weighing the possibilities. "We play dead, cut all non-essential systems, go dark. Maybe they'll think we're just another hunk of rock." Marla nodded, her face set in grim resolve. "It's risky, but it's our best shot." "Right," Dirk agreed, already working to shut down the ship's systems. "Let's hope they buy it." With practiced efficiency, the crew powered down everything but life support, the hum of the ship fading to a whisper. The rust bucket became a silent, waiting thing, nestled in its asteroid cocoon like a predator biding its time. The wait was excruciating, every second stretching into eternity as they listened for any sign of their pursuers. The darkness outside was oppressive, the silence a living thing that pressed down on them with the weight of 1,000 cold stars. "Any change?" Jackson asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Dirk shook his head, eyes never leaving the radar. "Nothing yet, but they're out there, I can feel it." Illy shifted restlessly, his usual confidence overshadowed by the tension. "If they find us, we're toast." "Then they won't find us," Jackson said, the words more a prayer than a promise. The minutes ticked by, the crew trapped in a purgatory of their own making. The universe turned relentlessly, uncaring of their plight, and time dragged on with cruel indifference. And then, just as they were beginning to believe their gamble had paid off, the radar flared to life. The signal was stronger now, a steady pulse that spoke of machines with a single-minded purpose. "They're closing in," Dirk said, his voice tight with dread. Jackson clenched his fists, the weight of command heavy on his shoulders. "All right, folks, looks like we're not out of the woods yet. Get ready. This might get ugly." The crew braced themselves, the dark humor and camaraderie giving way to grim determination. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they weren't about to go down without a fight. Because that's what they did, after all. They survived by the skin of their teeth and the seat of their pants. And if today was their last stand, They'd make damn sure it was one to remember. The Rust Bucket was an apt name if ever there was one, Jackson mused, glaring out the view screen at the rapidly approaching black hole. The laws of physics were about to play a twisted game of chicken, and they were the hapless participants with a rusted bucket for a chariot. The ship shuddered, groaned, and probably would have sworn in protest if it could. It was a tin can with pretensions of grandeur, barely held together by Dirk's duct-tape sorcery. But for now, it was all they had standing between them, and a very permanent vacation in the singularity's cosmic embrace. "Got a plan, Cap?" Illy asked, his voice dripping with the kind of optimism that suggested he had already accepted their inevitable demise, and was mostly curious about how spectacular their end would be. Jackson ran a hand through his hair, the weight of command heavy. "Well," he drawled, "I was thinking we use the black hole's gravitational pull to slingshot us out of here." Dirk snorted, eyes glued to the radar like it held the secrets of the universe. "You mean that thing that sucks in light, matter, and any chance of us seeing retirement?" "Yeah, that," Jackson replied, deadpan. "But hey, it's not like we have a lot of options. We could also just wait here until the AI come knocking, but I've seen enough of their hospitality to last a lifetime." Marla, busy tinkering with the power cells, looked up. "I don't know, Cap. Last time we trusted the Rust Bucket to handle anything more than a sneeze, we ended up with a hull breach and half the ship decompressing. Details, details." Jackson waved a dismissive hand. "Anyway, nothing's exploded in the last 10 minutes, so we might be due for a change of luck." Illy chuckled from his station. "Hey, I like those odds. Better than a 0% chance of survival, which is what we've got sitting pretty here." "All right," Jackson said, clapping his hands together. "Let's get this over with. Dirk, plot a course that keeps us from becoming a cosmic pasta." "Sure thing, Cap," Dirk said, his fingers dancing over the console with practiced ease. "I'll just ask the black hole really nicely not to eat us." The familiar hum of the Rust Bucket's gravitic engine sputtered to life, coughing and spluttering like a lifelong smoker taking on a marathon. Still, they were moving, and sometimes that was all you could ask for. "Looks like the AI are still out there," Dirk reported, his eyes narrowing at the radar's chaotic dance. "They're waiting for us to come out and play. Guess they're not big on hide and seek," Illy commented, adjusting the armament console for what was probably the 100th time today. "Can't say I blame him. Keep the weapons ready," Jackson instructed. "If this goes south, I want to at least tickle them before we go down." Marla's laugh was a dry, humorless thing. "That's one hell of an epitaph. Here lies the Rust Bucket, annoyed its enemies to death." "Better than nothing," Jackson replied, his gaze fixed on the void outside. The black hole loomed larger, and imposing more of darkness, promising oblivion with all the subtlety of an asteroid to the face. The ship's path wobbled slightly as they got closer, the vast gravitational forces tugging at the hull like a cat playing with a doomed mouse. "Hold it steady," Jackson barked, his grip on the controls tightening. "We need to hit the sweet spot if we're going to make this work." "Working on it," Dirk responded, his voice tense. "But I'm not a miracle worker, you know." "Could have fooled me," Illy quipped over his shoulder, earning a half-hearted chuckle from the crew. As they approached the event horizon, time seemed to slow, stretching each second into an eternity. The Rust Bucket groaned under the strain, every nut and bolt protesting the abuse. "Ready?" Jackson asked, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Ready as we'll ever be," Marla replied, securing the last of the power cells with a finality that suggested neither she nor the cells planned on going anywhere in a hurry. "Let's do this," Dirk said, jaw set. Jackson took a deep breath, the kind that was supposed to calm the nerves but only served to remind him how precious air was. Then he shoved the controls forward, propelling them on a trajectory that would either save their skins or smear them across a few dimensions. The ship lurched, engines roaring as they hurtled towards the abyss. The gravitational forces were immense, pulling at the fabric of reality itself, and Jackson had the distinctly uncomfortable sensation of being stretched in ways nature never intended. Feels like every bad decision I've ever made just caught up with me, Illy muttered, white-knuckled and wide-eyed. Welcome to adulthood, Marla shot back, her hands deftly guiding the stabilizers they both hoped would keep them in one piece. The rust bucket shivered, groaned, then finally began its perilous swing past the black hole. The ship's frame vibrated with a bone-rattling intensity, and for a heart-stopping moment Jackson thought they were done for. But somehow, impossibly, they emerged on the other side, flung out of the black hole's grip like a stone from a sling. "We're clear," Dirk shouted, his voice incredulous with relief. "Ha! Take that, physics," Illy exclaimed, punching the air triumphantly. Jackson allowed himself a rare grin. "Let's not get too cocky, folks. We're not out of the woods yet." Marla was already running diagnostics, her fingers a blur across the console. "Well, we didn't explode, so that's a start." "True, but we've still got those AI to deal with," Dirk reminded them, his eyes flicking back to the radar. Jackson nodded, his expression turning serious once more. "Right back to the real problem. Let's see what that stupidity amplifier can do." Illy perked up, his usual bravado returning. "You mean the ancient piece of tech we have no idea how to use or if it even works? Sounds like a plan." "Hey, we didn't sign up for this job because it was safe," Marla pointed out, a wry smile tugging at her lips. "Or smart," Dirk added. "But definitely because it was fun," Jackson concluded. "All right, let's get to it." The crew moved quickly, retrieving the stupidity amplifier from its makeshift home in the ship's library. It was an unassuming thing, no bigger than a toaster, with wires snaking out like tentacles and a screen that looked like it would be more comfortable in an 80s arcade. "Looks like something my granddad would have used to order pizza," Illy remarked, poking at it with a deliberate carelessness that suggested he had no idea what he was doing. Which, to be fair, none of them did. Marla raised an eyebrow. "Your granddad ordered pizza with ancient alien tech, apparently," Illy replied with a shrug. "He was ahead of his time." "All right, let's see if we can make this work," Jackson said, taking the device and examining it with the skepticism of someone who'd been burned by ancient wonders one too many times. Dirk tapped a few buttons, his expression dubious. "You really think this thing can confuse the AI, make them question their purpose or whatever that manual said?" "Who knows?" Jackson replied with a shrug. "But it's either this or hope they get bored and leave us alone." "And when has that ever worked?" Marla asked, busy connecting the amplifier to the ship's systems. "Never," Illy confirmed. "Which is why we're now relying on something called a stupidity amplifier." "Seems appropriate," Dirk muttered, watching as Jackson powered up the device. With a flick of a switch, the screen flickered to life, displaying a jumble of symbols and numbers that might have been ancient code or a toddler's attempt at abstract art. Either way, it screamed "Do not touch," which of course meant they had to. "All right," Jackson said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone of someone pretending to know what they're doing. "Let's see if we can broadcast this to the AI." Marla and Dirk worked quickly, syncing the device's signal with the ship's communications array. It was a haphazard job, the sort of thing they'd once been told should never be attempted outside of a controlled environment. Naturally, they ignored that advice. "Signal's ready," Dirk announced, stepping back from the console with the look of someone who'd just armed a bomb and hoped it wouldn't go off in their face. "Let's give them something to think about," Jackson said, hitting the transmit button. The rust bucket shuddered slightly as the signal burst out into the void, an ephemeral wave of confusion and nonsense aimed at their mechanical pursuers. They could only hope it would be enough to knock a few cogs loose in the eye's virtual heads. Seconds ticked by, the crew holding their collective breath as they waited for the result of their gamble. The silence was palpable, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Then slowly, the radar began to clear, the signatures of the AI fleet flickering and fading as if lost in thought. It worked?" Illy asked, disbelief coloring his tone. Jackson exhaled, a grin splitting his face. "Looks like it." "I'll be damned," Marla murmured, shaking her head with a mix of relief and incredulity. Well, that's one for the books, Dirk said, leaning back in his chair with a satisfied smile. The day we outsmarted a bunch of hyper-advanced machines with something called a stupidity amplifier. I told you my granddad was onto something, Illy quipped, earning a round of laughter from the crew. They'd survived another day, albeit by the slimmest of margins. The odds had been against them, the universe as unforgiving as ever, but they'd come out on top, at least for now. Jackson leaned back, the weight of command lifting slightly. All right, folks, let's get out of here before those AI wake up from their nap. The Rustbucket's engines roared to life once more, propelling them away from the black hole and their erstwhile pursuers. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. And in their line of work, that was more than enough. Does anyone smell smoke? Zeke Trist's voice crackled over the comm, cutting through the muted triumph on the Rustbucket's bridge. Typical Zeke. The guy thought a room wasn't complete until it came with a side of panic. Oh great, Dirk groaned, looking up from his radar screen that was held together by more duct tape than enthusiasm. Tell me we're not about to become a giant space cigarette. Relax, Illy chimed in, eternally optimistic in the face of chaos. Could just be Dirk's cooking again. Yeah, well, if we all die from inhaling burnt mystery meat, I want it on my tombstone. He was right about Dirk's culinary skills, Marla quipped, not looking up from the diagnostics she was still running. The ship had survived the black hole, but it still had a list of grievances longer than any of them cared to acknowledge. Jackson, trying to juggle the joy of not being obliterated with the potential for spontaneous combustion, turned toward the comm. Zeke, what's happening down there? Just a little experiment, Zeke replied, his tone casual enough to suggest he had a death wish or simply didn't value his eyebrows. I was modifying the ship's AI. Modifying? Jackson felt a vain throb in his temple. Are you trying to kill us or just yourself? Zeke made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a cough. Neither, hopefully. I'm trying to teach it to think like us. Think like us? Dirk chuckled, the sarcasm dripping like oil from a leaky valve. What, it's going to complain about Mondays and existential dread now? No, Zeke said, exasperation edging into his voice. The idea is to make it unpredictable like humans. If the AI fleet thinks our ship is as erratic as we are, it might just confuse them long enough for us to get a real lead. Unpredictable, huh? Illy mused, scratching his chin as if it would inspire profound wisdom. So if it starts singing show tunes, should we be worried? Only if it asks us to join in, Marla added dryly. Jackson rubbed his forehead, sensing that either a headache or a breakthrough was imminent. All right, Zeke, you've already messed with the ship. Let's see if it works. But if I hear one note of space oddity, I'm ejecting you. Zeke's voice came back with a hint of satisfaction. Acknowledged. The Rustbucket's AI, a glorified calculator with delusions of grandeur, started its new program with a series of chirps and beeps that seemed almost whimsical. It was the kind of sound you'd expect from an electronic device that hadn't yet discovered the crushing weight of the universe. Is it supposed to sound like that? Marla asked, not entirely sure whether to be concerned or amused. Beats me, Dirk replied, flicking a few switches on his radar station. But if it starts quoting philosophy, we're doomed. Let's hope it has a sense of humor, Jackson said, watching as the radar showed the AI fleet's erratic response to their sudden unpredictability. The enemy ships danced around like moths to a particularly bright, slightly unstable flame. The chaos was beautiful in a way if you squinted hard enough and ignored the potential for death. Looks like they're confused, Illy noted, a smirk playing on his lips. See, even advanced AI can't handle randomness. Marla rolled her eyes, turning her attention back to her console. Because the one thing the universe clearly lacks is randomness. The radar screen flickered, showing the AI fleet moving in a disjointed waltz, trying to anticipate the Rustbucket's next move. Whatever Zeke had done, it was working, for now. All right, Jackson said, feeling a surge of hope, let's keep this up. If we can outsmart them long enough, we just might get out of here in one piece. Or several smaller, Harder to count pieces, Dirk muttered, ever the pessimist. Always the optimist, Dirk, Marla said with a smirk. It wasn't long before the initial confusion among the AI fleet began to settle, their movements becoming more coordinated as they adapted to the rust bucket's erratic behavior. They had bought themselves time, but not much. Jackson scowled. Looks like they're catching on. Of course they are, Zeke replied, having joined them on the bridge, his expression a mix of triumph and dread. They're AI, not toddlers. Debatable, Dirk retorted, watching the screen. But they're learning faster than I'd like. Then we just have to be better, Illy said, his unwavering faith in humanity shining through with all the brilliance of a supernova. We've got something they don't. Marla raised an eyebrow. What's that? An unhealthy caffeine addiction. Desperation, Illy replied, a mischievous glint in his eye. And nothing's more dangerous than a human with nothing to lose. You forgot stubbornness, Jackson added with a grin. And stupidity, Dirk chimed in. Don't forget about that. Wouldn't dream of it, Jackson replied, his mood buoyed by the banter. Suddenly, the radar screen lit up with new contacts, causing Dirk to curse under his breath. Looks like the cavalry's arrived. More ships inbound. Fantastic, Marla said, her voice a dry desert of enthusiasm. Just what we needed. Jackson glanced at the radar, a plan forming in the back of his mind. Zeke, how's that AI modification holding up? Zeke adjusted his glasses, which somehow made him look even more the part of the mad scientist. It's doing its job, but we're running out of tricks. They'll adapt soon. Then we need to hit them with something they won't expect, Jackson said, thinking aloud. If we can get into the starship graveyard, maybe we can lose them in there. A bunch of derelict old ships, Dirk asked, skepticism etched into every line of his face. How's that gonna help? Think of it as a field of cover, Jackson replied. If we can make it look like one of the wrecks, they might overlook us long enough to skip town. Marla blew out a breath. That's a long shot. Long shots are our specialty, Illy quipped, his grin infectious. Right, Jackson said, his determination hardening. Let's do this. The rust bucket's engines groaned in protest as they shifted course, heading for the starship graveyard. It was a risky maneuver, but fortune favored the bold, or the insanely reckless, as was often the case. As they closed in on the graveyard, the derelict ships loomed large, a testament to past glories and present neglect. The sight of them was both comforting and chilling, a reminder that even the mightiest eventually ended up as space junk. All right, Jackson said, his voice steady. Illy, get those weapons ready just in case. Marla, keep those power cells primed. Dirk, Zeke, keep an eye on the radar and AI systems. We're about to play the ultimate game of hide and seek. With a shared sense of purpose, the crew sprang into action, their camaraderie and resilience the only thing standing between them and oblivion. They'd come too far to give up now, and if they were going down, they were damn well going to make it memorable. The rust bucket slipped into the starship graveyard like a shadow, weaving between the hulking remnants of a bygone era. The tension was palpable, each thrum of the engines, a reminder of how precarious their situation was. Feels like we're in a museum, Illy noted, his voice hushed as if afraid to disturb the ghosts of the past. Yeah, Marla replied, her eyes scanning the ships around them. A museum that could kill us at any moment. Adds to the thrill, Dirk said with a half-smile. Only you would find this thrilling, Zeke muttered, his fingers dancing over the controls. As they maneuvered deeper into the graveyard, the AI fleet followed, though with evident caution. The tangle of derelict ships offered cover, but also the risk of collision. It was a delicate balance of speed and stealth, one misstep away from disaster. Okay, Jackson said, his mind racing. Let's try something different. He keyed the comm, relaying instructions to the crew. Each step was calculated, each move designed to exploit the AI fleet's logic while maximizing their own unpredictability. It was a dance on the edge of a knife, and they were the ones holding the blade. And then, as if on cue, the AI ships hesitated, their formations faltering. Whatever Zeke's modifications had done, The machines were struggling to adapt to the rust bucket's erratic tactics. "They're backing off," Dirk said, disbelief coloring his tone. "Good," Jackson replied, his grip on the controls easing just a fraction. "But we can't get cocky, keep them guessing." Illy fired up the armament console, his smile one of a man who'd never met a problem he couldn't shoot. "Let's give 'em a show they'll never forget." With newfound vigor, the crew pressed their advantage, navigating the graveyard with a reckless grace. They used every trick, every ounce of cunning and defiance they could muster. They weren't just doing this to survive. They were doing it because they could. "Looks like they're reconsidering their life choices," Marla observed, watching as the AI fleet began to withdraw. "Can machines have midlife crises?" Illy wondered aloud. "If they can, we're about to give them one," Zeke replied, adjusting the AI controls with a finesse that bordered on the poetic. The rust bucket danced between the derelicts, each maneuver a testament to the crew's resilience and sheer audacity. The AI fleet, once a looming threat, now struggled to keep pace, their efforts to regain control slipping through digital fingers. As the graveyard thinned, the rust bucket emerged from the other side, the remnants of the AI fleet left in their wake. It was a victory, albeit a temporary one, but it was enough. "Not bad," Dirk said, his voice thick with satisfaction. "Not bad at all," Jackson agreed, allowing himself a moment of triumph. "But let's not stick around for the curtain call. We've got a head start, let's make the most of it." With the AI fleet in disarray, the rust bucket surged forward, the stars stretching out ahead like a promise of freedom. They weren't in the clear yet, but they had the advantage, and in their line of work, that was everything. As they sped away from the chaos, Jackson felt a weight lift from his shoulders. They'd faced impossible odds and come out on top, proving once again that humanity's greatest strength wasn't technology, but the stubborn, irrepressible will to survive. "Well," Illy said, leaning back in his chair, "I guess we can add confused an entire AI fleet to our resumes." "And survived a black hole," Marla added with a wry smile. "Don't forget did it all with a ship held together by duct tape and sarcasm," Dirk quipped. Zeke, for once, didn't have a quip of his own, just a satisfied smile that spoke volumes. They'd done it against all odds and logic and lived to tell the tale. Jackson let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "All right, team, let's keep moving. We've got a lot of stars to cover and not a lot of time to do it." The rust bucket pressed on, a beacon of human defiance and grit in the vast, uncaring expanse of space. For now they were safe, but the universe had a way of keeping things interesting. And somehow, Jackson wouldn't have it any other way. The rust bucket rumbled through space, its engines protesting like a disgruntled old man complaining about the good old days. The crew was still riding the high from their narrow escape, but they were also acutely aware that they were far from out of the woods, or void as it were. "All right," Jackson declared, the captain's hat sitting jauntily atop his head like a crown of misplaced confidence. "We're not out of this mess yet. Zeke, you got that little surprise ready?" Zeke looked up from the console where he was fiddling with wires like a kid trying to hotwire a car. "Oh, you mean the stupidity amplifier? Yeah, it's ready. It's either going to save our asses or, well, you know." "Do tell," Marla drawled, her eyes not leaving her diagnostics panel. "I'm dying to know how you plan to outdumb an entire fleet of AI." Dirk leaned back in his chair, his feet propped up on the radar console that was more duct tape than display. "We're talking about AI here. Overthinking's kind of their thing, so a little stupidity might just be the smart move. Or our last move," Illy added, his optimism undeterred by the situation. "But hey, if we're going down, might as well confuse the hell out of them while we do it." "Exactly," Jackson said with a grin that was part devil-may-care, part "we're all gonna die." "Time to introduce these bots to the wonderful world of human logic." Zeke punched a few more buttons, the ship's AI humming in the background like it was trying to remember the lyrics to an old Earth ballad. "Okay, folks. Once we fire this thing up, there's no going back. We basically become the universe's biggest question mark." "Great," Dirk sighed, because what our lives really need right now is more uncertainty. On my signal then, Jackson said, his voice steady even as his heart drummed a breakbeat in his chest. Let's see if we can out-weird an AI. The crew nodded, each preparing for the chaos to come. Illy checked the armament console one last time, making sure their weapons were ready. Not that they'd done much good so far, but it was the thought that counted. Marla double-checked the power cells, ready to squeeze every drop of juice out of them if needed. Dirk kept his eyes glued to the radar, watching as the AI fleet regrouped, their movements increasingly confident. "Looks like they think they've got us cornered," Dirk muttered, his fingers tapping nervously against the console. "Then let's surprise them," Jackson replied, his grin sharpening into something almost feral. "All right, Zeke, hit it." With a flourish that would have made a stage magician jealous, Zeke activated the stupidity amplifier. The ship systems whirred and clicked, the lights flickering like they were trying to decide if they wanted to be on or off. And then, silence. The kind that presses in from all sides, making you feel like you're in the eye of a storm. "Did it work?" Illy asked, breaking the tension with his usual obliviousness to the perils they faced. Marla glanced around, her expression a mix of skepticism and curiosity. "Either that or we just gave them a really confusing light show." Just then the radar began to ping erratically, like a drunk trying to find the bathroom in a crowded bar. Dirk's eyes widened as he pointed at the screen. "Holy hell, they're backing off." Jackson leaned over, his eyebrows raised. "Well, what do you know?" It actually worked. The AI fleet, once a coordinated wall of impending doom, was now a scattered mess, each ship moving in a different direction as if they were running from a bad smell. "Looks like they can't handle the nonsense," Zeke said, a victorious gleam in his eye. "Finally, a situation where being dumb has its advantages," Dirk quipped, shaking his head in disbelief. "Not just dumb," Illy corrected, his smile as bright as a supernova. "Human, the chaotic kind they can't predict." Jackson let out a laugh, the tension evaporating from his shoulders. "And to think they probably spent eons trying to outsmart us, when all it took was a little unpredictability. Never underestimate our ability to be completely irrational," Marla said, a rare smile playing at her lips. "It's our secret weapon." With the AI fleet in disarray, the rust bucket sped away, the stars beckoning like the open arms of a lover you just narrowly avoided having dinner with. The crew couldn't believe their luck or their own audacity. "We did it," Jackson said, his voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might jinx their success. "We outsmarted a fleet of AI with sheer stupidity, and lived to tell the tale," Zeke added, his fingers still dancing over the controls as if he couldn't quite believe it himself. Dirk leaned back, a satisfied grin plastered across his face. "And to think, all these years I've been told I'm too stupid to succeed. Turns out it's a superpower." Marla rolled her eyes but didn't bother hiding her amusement. "Let's not get too cocky. We've still got a long way to go before we're in the clear." "Yeah," Illy said, nodding sagely. "But hey, at least we've got a story to tell." "The kind that gets better with every retelling," Jackson agreed, his eyes twinkling with mischief. The crew settled into a comfortable rhythm, the earlier tension ebbing away like a receding tide. They'd pulled off the impossible, and for now, that was enough. As the last remnants of the AI fleet vanished into the void, the rust bucket continued its journey, a ship held together by dreams, duct tape, and a healthy dose of irreverence. "You know," Jackson said, looking out at the infinite expanse of space, "maybe we're not as doomed as we thought." Marla snorted. "Don't get ahead of yourself, Captain. There's always another disaster waiting around the corner." "True," Jackson conceded. "But at least we know we can survive being stupid. And that's worth more than all the data cores in the galaxy," Zeke added, his voice filled with a warmth that belied his usual cynicism. The rust bucket hurtled through space, its engines humming a discordant tune that was music to the crew's ears. They'd faced the darkness and emerged victorious, their spirits unbroken and their resolve stronger than ever. For now, they had a chance. A chance to keep flying, to keep dreaming, and to keep proving that sometimes, just sometimes, humanity's greatest strength was its ability to embrace the chaos and come out laughing on the other side. "All right," Jackson said, leaning back with a satisfied grin. "Let's see where this rust bucket takes us next." And with that, the rust bucket disappeared into the vast unknown, a testament not to humanity's flaws, but to its unyielding spirit and the stubborn, reckless hope that drove them ever forward. "Well, that was something," Jackson said, a hint of disbelief still lingering in his voice. The rust bucket was limping along through the starship graveyard, like an old dog finally escaping the pound. "We're still in one piece, more or less." "Yeah, but pieces held together with duct tape and hope," Marla muttered, her fingers dancing over the diagnostics panel with the precision of a surgeon who also happens to be mildly intoxicated. "Don't forget sarcasm," Dirk chimed in, adjusting his slouched position with the practiced ease of someone used to chairs that threatened to collapse at any moment. "The ship's practically a monument to our collective cynicism." "Well, it's sturdy enough to have survived our brilliance," Zeke added, fidgeting with the wires on his console, as if he were a disappointed parent trying to fix a child's broken toy. "Or our stupidity, depending on how you look at it." Illy, ever the optimist, couldn't help but smile. "I'm just glad we can still look at it, or anything for that matter." "Enough patting ourselves on the back," Marla said, eyeing the power cells like a gambler eyeing one last bet. "We've got a long way to go and energy reserves that are about as encouraging as a funeral invitation." "I'd prefer a wedding invitation," Dirk commented. "Less likely to end in disaster." "Depends on the marriage," Jackson replied, a smirk tugging at his lips. All right," Illy interjected, waving his hands like a referee breaking up a particularly sarcastic wrestling match. "Let's get back to work. Or whatever it is we do that passes for work." "Right," Jackson agreed, his gaze fixed on the expanse of forgotten ships drifting lazily past them. They were like ghosts of a once great empire, reminders of a time when humanity reached for the stars and ended up burning their fingers. "First order of business, plotting a course out of this scrapyard." Dirk raised an eyebrow. "And into what exactly?" "More trouble, probably," Marla said with a resigned shrug. "But that's what we do, isn't it?" "Trouble's practically our middle name," Zeke added, still fiddling with the ship's AI. It was purring softly now, like an unpredictable cat that might pounce or purr depending on its mood. "And let's not forget our last name, Defiance." "Sounds like a dysfunctional family reunion," Illy quipped, glancing at the armament console with the kind of affection usually reserved for an old and slightly unreliable friend. "Speaking of family reunions," Jackson said, turning back to the crew, "where do we go from here? Any bright ideas?" "Anywhere but here," Marla suggested. "Graveyards give me the creeps." "You mean the thrill of rummaging through the cosmic equivalent of an antique store doesn't excite you?" Dirk teased, stretching his arms behind his head. "Only if I get to keep whatever we find," Marla shot back. "Well, let's not get too greedy," Jackson said, his mind already on the next move. "We need to find somewhere to resupply and repair this bucket before it falls apart." Zeke nodded, finally looking up from his tinkering. "I hear there's a trading post a few light years from here. We might be able to barter for what we need." "Barter with what?" Dirk asked, skepticism dripping from his words like oil from a leaky engine. "Our sparkling personalities. We've got a few odds and ends from the graveyard," Illy said. "Nothing fancy, but it's something." "Story of our lives," Jackson said, shaking his head with a bemused grin. "Never fancy, but somehow always enough." "So, what's the plan, Captain?" Marla asked, her tone both challenging and cooperative, a balance she'd perfected over years of dealing with Jackson's sometimes questionable decisions. "Simple," Jackson replied, adopting that air of misplaced confidence that somehow always got them through. "We head for this trading post, see what we can scrounge up, and then get back to doing what we do best." "Making bad decisions," Dirk suggested. "Surviving," Jackson corrected, though his smile suggested Dirk wasn't entirely wrong. With a shared groan that was part resignation, part camaraderie, the crew got to work. The Rustbucket's engines wheezed as if annoyed by the prospect of more travel, but they held steady. They had a course, a destination, and a hint of purpose, however vague. As the ship crawled away from the graveyard, Marla leaned back, eyeing the diagnostic screen with something that resembled relief. "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm actually looking forward to a trading post." "That's because you haven't seen one in a while," Dirk said, his tone dry as a desert. "Maybe," Marla admitted. "But at least it's not a graveyard." "Technically," Zeke pointed out, "a lot of trading posts are just graveyards with a bit more commerce." "Thanks for the uplifting perspective, Zeke," Illy murmured, shaking his head in amusement. It was a small comfort, but the thought of seeing other people, even the kind who might try to swindle or rob them, was a strangely reassuring one. It was a reminder that, for all its faults, the universe was at least consistent in its unpredictability. "So, what do we trade when we get there?" Illy asked, flipping switches and adjusting dials with the absent-minded precision of someone who could do it in his sleep. "Our good looks and charm," Dirk suggested. "If that's our plan, we're doomed," Jackson deadpanned, earning a round of chuckles from the crew. "Well," Marla said, tapping her console with a thoughtful finger, "we could always sell tickets to our next near-death experience. Bound to be a hit." "People love a good disaster story," Zeke agreed, "especially when someone else is living it." "True enough," Jackson said, unable to suppress a grin. "But seriously, we'll figure something out." "We always do." The trading post loomed in the distance, a collection of patched-together modules and assorted debris that somehow supported life. It wasn't much to look at, but it was exactly what they needed, a chance to catch their breath and resupply before diving back into the chaos of the universe. As they approached, Dirk let out a low whistle. "Looks like we're not the only ones in the market for some goods." "Good," Marla said, her eyes narrowing with a hint of competitive spirit. "More potential suckers, I mean customers." "Let's just hope we're not the ones getting suckered," Illy cautioned, though his voice was tinged with anticipation rather than fear. "Time to put on our best poker faces," Jackson said, adjusting his hat with a flourish that suggested he was more than ready for the challenge. The Rustbucket docked with a shuddering thud that suggested it was happy to have reached somewhere, anywhere, even if only temporarily. The crew disembarked, stepping out into the bustling chaos of the trading post with a mix of wariness and hope. The marketplace was packed with vendors hawking everything from questionable tech to even more questionable food items. The air was thick with the scent of opportunity and desperation, a potent mix that was both exhilarating and exhausting. "All right, team," Jackson said, pulling them into a huddle that was more for show than necessity. "Let's see what we can get our hands on. And remember, no matter how good the deal sounds, it's probably a scam." Dirk grinned. "So, business as usual then." "Business as usual," Jackson confirmed, clapping him on the shoulder. They split up, each heading in a different direction, eyes peeled for potential deals and ears perked for any hint of trouble. In a place like this, the line between buyer and victim was thinner than a razor's edge. Marla found herself drawn to a booth piled high with spare parts. She picked through the pile with the deftness of someone who'd spent a lifetime making do with less than optimal equipment. "Looking for something specific?" the vendor asked, a sly glint in his eye. "Depends," Marla replied, not bothering to look up. "You got anything that doesn't come with a hidden surprise?" The vendor chuckled. "Not many customers ask for that. But I might have something in the back." Meanwhile, Jackson was busy charming a group of traders with tales of their recent exploits. It was a delicate balance, painting themselves as just desperate enough to need a deal, but not so desperate as to be easy marks. Dirk and Illy teamed up, scouring the market for essentials, food, water, and whatever else they could carry back to the Rustbucket without raising too many eyebrows. Zeke, true to form, wandered off in search of anything that might be deemed risky or experimental. He loved a good challenge almost as much as he loved causing panic. The Iors slipped by, the crew slowly amassing a collection of goods that might just see them through their next adventure. As they reconvened near the rust bucket, each carried a small bundle of supplies, their expressions a mix of triumph and relief. "Not bad," Illy said, surveying their haul. "We might just make it after all. For now," Dirk said, ever the realist. "But let's not get too comfortable. We've still got a long way to go." "Yeah," Jackson agreed, his eyes scanning the crowd for any sign of trouble. "But at least we've got a chance." Marla nodded, a rare smile gracing her lips. "And that's more than we had yesterday." With a collective sigh of relief, they boarded the rust bucket, their spirits buoyed by the prospect of another day, another chance to survive and maybe even thrive. As the engines roared to life, the ship vibrated with the familiar rhythm of adventure.